It's possible that you're going to find out in the next 30 minutes that you're living life all wrong. How about that for an upper to start Love Does? I know that's a pretty big claim, and it may not be true for everyone in the room, but if it's possibly true for you, I want to ask you today to be open to it. Now, I know sometimes when pastors say such things, the image that kind of comes into your mind is something like this. Yeah, he tells me I'm living life all wrong. He probably thinks I'm an awful person. And he wants me to change my life so that it looks like, a good Christian would. It's probably a life of misery, but at least it would be a good Christian. I don't really want to, but I might if I feel like, I'm guilted into doing the right thing. Sometimes that's the image that people anticipate. That is not this image. Instead, what's going to happen tonight is I'm going to describe a kind of life to you. It's a life that, of course, is marked by love does. It's a life that might be different than the life you're living now, but when you hear it described to you, you might actually realize it's a better life. It's the life that God has in mind for you, and you might take a step back and say, you know what, that's not how I've been living my life, but I'd like to. I would hate to miss out on that life. Some of you have already lived 3/4 of your life, and you've missed out on it so far. You only have 1/4 of your life left. Some of you have lived half of your life, and you've missed out so far, but you have half of your life left. Some of you have lived 1/4 of your life, and you could reset right now, and for the last 3/4 of your life, you could live it in a way that's in alignment with God and not misery to you. It's actually beautiful to you, but not easy either. And so, if you get to the end of the message tonight, and you sense that you may have constructed your life in the wrong way, I'm inviting you to consider making a change. If it hits you like a ton of bricks tonight, don't you dare wake up tomorrow morning and do the same things you did this morning when you woke up. And even if it's not a ton of bricks, if it's just some percolating questions that you feel like, I need to take a little deeper dive on that, then absolutely take a deeper dive. Do not allow yourself to shake off this message tonight and just go on back to the old way that you were. And so we're going to, of course, cast this in the sense of love does. I started this last week to remind us of a couple of really important things about love does. So let's start there. Love does embraces a love that, of course, is not scarce and it's not effortless. When you think about love, don't let yourself for a moment think that love is scarce, that there's only a limited supply, and if you give some, you'll run out. It's not that way. And don't let yourself think for a moment that love is a feeling and that whatever is love must just feel natural. It should just flow. I should kind of drift into a life of love. It doesn't work that way either. Love is not scarce. There's a source from God. It's unlimited. But it also takes a lot of effort, and at times it will cost us a great deal. The promise, though, is that after you've constructed your life that way, it will be beautiful. I think John, one of Jesus' friends, one of his followers and disciples, captured it best. Let's go to this. This is 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8. This is what he says. He says, "Dear friends, let us love one another." Now, that's not that complicated, right? Let us love one another. Think about it. You actually could move from being awful at loving to average. And you could move from being average to awesome. For some of you, get this, you could actually move from being awful all the way to awesome if you and I would embrace the way of Jesus, which is to love one another. He says, for this love, it comes from God. You're not going to run out. God is love. It flows from him through you to others. And then get this. He says, everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. This is how God showed his love among us. It wasn't effortless. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we, his followers, might live through him. The guy who wrote this is, of course, the same John who wrote the biography of Jesus. We call it one of our Gospels, the fourth book of the New Testament. And when he's kind of capturing Jesus' message to his followers, one of the things that John writes down, tries to write it down exactly as Jesus said it, goes like this. Jesus says, here's how they'll know you're my disciples, that you love one another. I mean, as far as being a follower of Jesus, there's nothing more central to it than love. The world should look around, and when they see someone loving, say, well, that's probably a follower of Jesus. And see someone who's not loving and say, that's probably not a follower of Jesus. I don't know how they would look at you. I'm kind of curious about that. How do you look at you? Do you think, man, I'm just dominated by love. There's this limitless source, and I go for it every time? Because I think the people around me would say, that person's a follower of Jesus. If you're supposed to judge followers of Jesus, and Jesus says you are, by whether you're a loving person or not. That's powerful. And so each week we've been kind of asking ourselves a question. We'll have one every week. And let me just say it this week. What does love do this week? Well, last week we said, of course, love says, I'm with you. And I asked all of you, if you were here, to make sure you found 3 people to make sure you said, I'm with you. Did you do that? Yes, good. Even the ones who didn't say it, I'm going to assume you did it. I really do need to make sure that we practice this love, because the very idea of thinking about love or praying about love actually works against love. Love does. It was interesting to me because on Monday every week I get a printout. This week it was 3 pages long in really small print of all the things that you wrote down for us to pray about on your connection cards. And we spend time praying through those. We have a team that prays through those. We go to God on your behalf. And I just thought this week as I was reading them, I thought, well, I am glad we're praying for them. I really am. But there's about 30 people here who shouldn't just be saying, I hope you're not just saying, hey, pastor, pray for this person. Because the very person's name that was written down on here, that's probably who you should have gone to and said, I'm with you. That's the nature of following Jesus. And I don't know about you, but in our community group, we had a pretty good discussion about I'm with you. If you're not in one of these groups, you're totally missing out. Bob Goff told this wild story in the group. You remember this about, taking off when he was a high school student, going to Yosemite, and somebody just going with him. Not just somebody who got married the day before and left his wife to go with Bob. Right? Now, I don't know about you, but in my group, we talked about that, and there was a little bit of a sense to say, awesome story, Bob. That's not realistic for me. Right? Now, I am hoping that out of the midst of our church, that there will be at least a few people who decide they're going to do something radical in loving the people around them. But I also thought, don't end up doing nothing just because you couldn't envision yourself doing something radical. Because there were other stories that were told last week. Remember the story of John? The story we told in here at the end of the service? He came to church, and he just met somebody who looked like they were sitting alone. And I thought, any of us could do that. Bob told us last week we were going to have to quit things in order to actually live out love. And of course, he quit high school, and a lot of us thought, well, I'm not going to be able to quit. What am I going to do, quit my job? No, don't quit your job. Quit coming to church 5 minutes late. Come 5 minutes early instead and do what John did. Those are the things you need to quit. Quit watching This Is Us. I know. Can you believe I would say such a thing? Pick some other show if you want to keep watching that one. Just open up an hour in your week to go love somebody. If you're going to quit something every week, you're probably going to have to choose things at that scale, but things at that scale really can make a difference. And this is what we're doing. We're saying love does. So I hope you said, I'm with you. Love does this week. What does it do? Love risks for true success. Love risks for true success. Now, I want to ask you this week to risk something for true success. Now, I'm going to dive into what this really means. That whole statement has a lot of meaning behind it, but let me just name this at first. True success clearly is defined by some action of love. Right? There's lots of ways people define success. I'm suggesting to you that only true success has love attached to it. So we know that. And here's the other thing I know. That when you truly try to love somebody, if it's a true expression of love, usually there's a little risk involved. There's the potential it could fail, it could backfire, it could be embarrassing, it might not go well. That is real potential. And so one of the moments that we all decide on in our lives is when we have the chance to love, the question is, am I actually going to go for it, or am I going to shrink back a little bit? And so that's how we describe this love. Now, before I get into how that love would look for you, I need to explain, and I think maybe help a lot of people unlearn something that will keep us from doing this, okay? So let me unpack this a little bit. First of all, regret is miserable. Regret is miserable. I'm not trying to get you to unlearn that. That's actually true. The Bible has an image that it gives us for the nature of regret. Here's the image. It calls it the gnashing of teeth. Would you actually do something with me right now? Would you, literally in your mouth, put your teeth together, kind of squeeze them together a little bit, and then rub them back and forth? I mean, it's not comfortable, but some of us know that feeling because we actually did that in a moment of regret. It felt like this. We were like, ugh. And sometimes the true regret, I mean, it marks your life. I mean, maybe it was dramatic. You were the drunk driver. And you hit somebody. And the only thing you can feel out of that decision, out of that experience, days later, years later, is, oh. Maybe you were the adulterer. It was a stupid, selfish decision. And it cost you. It cost you. And it's not coming back. And when you feel regret, if you feel it, don't you? It's like, ugh. Regret, you should try to avoid regret. Because regret is miserable. Now, when the Bible describes the gnashing of teeth, it actually doesn't describe it in terms of events that happen within our lives. It actually describes it at a point where we've gotten to the end of our life. And we look back at our life, the choices we made or the choices we didn't make. And while there are people who make stupid decisions and selfish decisions, and within life, it leads you to live regret in life, I think the Bible is pointing to something. It says actually the most powerful part of this is that you could get to the end of your life and look back on life. And you do not want to be at the end of your days and think, ugh, I missed it. I messed up. You do not want to go there. Regret is miserable. But here's what people misunderstand. Tragically, people in their minds attach regret to failure. Tragically, incorrectly, people in their minds attach regret to failure. And you can understand how this happens. You've probably let it happen to you. I know I have. We've thought about what are the moments we regretted something, and in a generic sort of way, failure was attached to it, but we don't actually dive down and say, but what led to the failure? And I just described some stupid decisions or some selfish decisions. That's what you should regret, right? But the failure piece, the moment we start attaching regret to failure, it means we'll start to try to build our lives in such a way that we never fail. And that's actually a great way to get to the end of your life and experience a lot of regret. Where does regret come from? Think about this with me. Does it come from failure? The answer is no. Listen to me. I want to suggest to you that it is God's will, it is God's plan for your life that you go through failure. That's not something you should avoid. It's actually something you should embrace. What you and I know is that it was actually in the times of failure within our lives that you and I grew the most. God actually did some of his greatest work at the moments of our failure. In the way that we construct our lives, when you were a child, there was a lot of failing and learning and growing. It took you a long time before you were able to walk up on two legs. But the moment we move out of childhood and no one's pushing us, no one's leading us anymore, and the only person who's left to lead you is yourself, what you find is the hardest person in the world to lead is yourself. And so instead of being willing to go through the pain that comes with trying and failing and growing, we could start to construct our lives in a way that we would not fail. And it leaves us missing out. How do I know that failure is part of God's plan? How do I know? Because it's all over the scriptures. All over the stories. Read any story of any significant movement in the scriptures, and it's marked by failure. You want to talk about Paul? Ends up as one of the greatest missionaries The world. How did that actually work out for him? Well, it started as him being a person who's killing Christians. That ended up being transformed into his life. He went into some missionary journeys, and multiple times he was shipwrecked, right? He was beaten. He was stoned, not stoned like people threw rocks at him and tried to kill him. That looks like failure, doesn't it? But it wasn't. That's what God used. Talk about Peter. We're going to talk about Peter a little bit tonight. Peter's the loudmouth of the disciples. He's the one who will go for it. What does he do? When Jesus is walking on the water, Peter's like, I'd like to try that. And he goes out and he walks on the water and then he sinks. And then Jesus helps him up. Peter's the one who said, Jesus, I'll never leave you. And then he left him. 3 times denied Jesus. And then what did Jesus do? He restored Peter. And Peter became one of the greatest leaders the church ever knew. This doesn't just happen in the Bible. I don't know about you, it happens in my life, right? You all are the beneficiaries of a little church outside of Havana, Illinois called Isabel Church that I preached a lot of bad sermons at when I was in college. Right? They were terrible. And those people there, they were so gracious. But you don't get to preach good sermons until you've preached some bad ones. That's the way life works. I send them a Christmas card every year and say, thank God for you people. You put up with a lot of awful stuff. But what about you? Failure cannot be the thing that we attach regret to. Failure is actually part of God's plan for our life. To risk and to fail and to grow and to move is part of the way God develops us. It can't be that those two are associated. So if they're not associated, where does regret, this true regret, come from? Well, there's actually 2 very simple answers. One is that regret comes from playing it safe. That you get to the end of your life and you constructed your life in such a way that you didn't want to fail, so it meant you didn't take any risks at all. And you get to the end of your life and you missed out. You missed out on almost all the good stuff because it comes with the potential of failure. The Bible says it is God's plan for you. It is His way for you to live by faith. To take steps and to take risks where you can't calculate where you're going to land, but you take them anyway. And sometimes God catches you, and sometimes you succeed, and sometimes you fail, and you pick yourself up, or God picks you up, and you move on. You know this, right? That living life in the comfort zone doesn't make for a safe life. It makes for a small life. And people get to the end of their life, and they've missed out. That's one way that we end up with regret, is not being willing to take risks. Here's the other way to end up with regret, is to put your head down and succeed in life, but to actually succeed in life in ways that don't matter at all. You should be afraid of that. Of getting to the end of your life and you just decided to kind of let your brain run on the same track, whatever the rest of culture's brain's track ran on, and you said, I'm going to do that. And then because you weren't going to fail, you put your head down and you worked and you got to the end of your life. Listen, some of you have made a lot of money. That's great. It is. Some of you live in a really big house. That's awesome. Seriously, that's awesome. Some of you are the most popular person in your neighborhood. Like you're the life of the party person. I think that's fantastic. Some of you are the hottest girl at school or at work. Some of you have climbed the ladder of success and been promoted and promoted and promoted. Here's the only question. When you were climbing the ladder, was it leaning against the right wall? Because one of the greatest regrets, I talk to people at the end of their life. One of the greatest regrets people have at the end of their life is they were actually successful at things that don't matter. And so you wouldn't want to construct your life just in alignment with the way that everyone else says to construct it. You would want to say, I want to live a life that's difference-making. I'd want to live a life where God would use me to impact the world. I want to live a life that's marked by love, and love that takes risks. I mentioned earlier John's biography of Jesus. We actually have 4 biographies of Jesus. If you're not super familiar with the scriptures, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each one of them write from a little bit different angle. And one of the things that's interesting is that there's not necessarily a lot of parallel. There's some parallel in between 2 or maybe 3 of them a lot. There are very few things, very few words of Jesus that get recorded in all 4 biographies. But one of the things that gets recorded, I'll read the version from the Gospel of Mark. It says this: "Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said," now just sit with that picture for a second. He's created 2 circles. There is a crowd. This is the masses of people who are kind of interested, but certainly not devoted to following Jesus. That's the crowds. And then there's the disciples. These are the people who have decided they're going to study under Jesus and try to become the kind of person like he is. And so it kind of says this. There's crowds and there's disciples. He called them. This is very intentional. And he's going to describe in just a second what a disciple of Jesus looks like. And don't miss what's happening. He's saying, some of you are in the crowd and some of you are disciples. After I describe this to you, some of you are going to want to stay in the circles that you're in. Those of you who are disciples, you're going to say, yep, I'm up for that. I want to be a disciple. Some of you are in the crowd, and you're going to say, nope, not up for that. I'm going to stay in the crowd. And it's also possible that some of you who are now disciples are actually going to exit. You're like, I'm not up for that. I'm believing I'm going to be part of the crowd. And some of you who are in the crowd would say, I'm up for that. And you'd move into being one of the disciples. So he's going to bring some definition to what it looks like to be a follower of his. This is beautiful if you let it be. He says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Now, that's a challenge. I mean, that's a challenge for you, isn't it? I ask people, actually in the spirit of this, I ask people to commit to serving. Maybe even at Suncrest, commit to serving on a regular schedule, on a substantial schedule, like a weekly schedule, in the spirit of this. And people all the time say, oh, no, I'm not up for that. And it's not that. I mean, that's 1 hour a week. This is pick up your cross, follow me, deny yourself. This is not easy. This is not without cost. You don't drift into this. It's challenging, and you could totally fail. You might end up dead. But Jesus says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it. You construct your life in such a way that you put all the safety mechanisms in. You make sure you save your life. Make sure you don't fail. Make sure you don't take a risk. Make sure you get to do what you want to do. You can construct your life that way. Jesus says you will get to the end of your life, and you'll think, what do I do with my life? And it will be marked by a feeling that goes, ugh. He says, but whoever loses their life for me. Now, I'm not sure about this word loses. I think he was playing a little literary trick because he used the word lose in the sentence before. And there's certainly a concept of lose, but maybe even the better word here is spend. That you would spend your life, whoever would spend their life for me and for the gospel, they'll save it. What's that life look like if you lose your life for Jesus and for the gospel? I can tell you what it looks like. It looks like love. It looks like I do the loving thing, even when it's hard and even when it's a risk and when I might fail. That's what I would do. It looks like love. And then he says this. What good is it? This is a great question. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? That's a good question, Jesus. What good is it to chase something all the way up the ladder, only to realize that when you get to the top of the ladder, you are climbing up the wrong wall? People who do that, they get to their end of their life and they go, ugh. Now, what does this mean? Lose your life, spend your life for him. Does it mean you need to become a pastor? Oh, God, no. It doesn't mean that. I promise you it doesn't mean that. I mean, if he puts that specific calling on your life, you gotta pay attention to it. But chances are, your coworker doesn't need you to be a pastor. They need you to be a Christian. And your neighbor, they don't need you to be a pastor. In fact, you becoming a pastor would move you out of the very setting where God has called you to be a person where love does, where you'd take a risk and you'd walk across the backyard and you'd engage in help or a conversation. Your spouse doesn't need you to be a pastor. They need you to spend your life loving them. And it will be hard, and sometimes it'll fail. It'll even backfire at times. But you will get to the end of your life, and I promise you this, at the end of your life, you will not go, ugh. You will think, yeah. And so let me, very briefly here, create a few images for you so that we can kind of capture this and capture, I think, what it means for all of us today. I like to use, from time to time, you've probably seen me do this before, the image of kind of a roadway or a highway. And one of the reasons this is helpful, I think, is because, there's kind of a straight path, the highway. And if you can stay on the path, the way of Jesus, I mean, it leads into a life that is used by God to change lives. That you get to the end of your life and you think, I was faithful, I was right, I've seen transformation happen through me. You could stay on that path. But there are potential places to go on either side of that path where you totally get off track. And I'm asking you today to pay attention to whether you might be off track and to potentially reset. So let me describe these two things that are often one side of the ditch or often the other. On one side of the ditch, your regret could be, I didn't risk. There was no risk. I didn't construct my life that way at all. Now, listen, I know there's big examples and there's small examples, but I mean, you have to know this, that the story of my life is trying to risk and sometimes failing and sometimes not taking the risk. Let me tell you just a couple of very small stories. One you would never know about. A number of years ago, I was sitting in the dentist office in the waiting room, and a person came into the dentist office, and he looked a little bit disheveled. He obviously had an immediate pain in his tooth, in his mouth, and he walked up to the counter, and he said, I need this done. They did a quick assessment, and he said, how much would it be? And the answer was $300, and he didn't have $300, and he turned around and he walked out. And the whole time while I'm eavesdropping on this conversation, I sense what I think was the Spirit of God prompting me to say, Greg, go pay the $300. I have $300. And I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I never met him. I just think, those are just images to me of times where I think God was prompting me to do something that was loving, that would cost me something. If it's just right, I didn't do it. That leads to a little bit of regret. Think about our church, right? Some of you have only been around a short time. Some of you have been around a long time. A number of years ago, it was me who cast this vision. Hey, let's go multi-site. Let's have multiple campuses all over Northwest Indiana. And we all were generous, and we all did things, and we put a lot of effort and staff and time into it. And there were some really great things that happened at those campuses. But within the last 18 months, we finally closed our last 2 campuses. And sometimes people ask me, Greg, do you regret starting the campuses? My answer is no. No, it's okay. Because sometimes you go for it, and it flourishes. And sometimes you go for it, and you learn things. That's just the way life works. But you do not want to construct your life in a way where there's no risk. Because when you construct your life in the way of no risk, it is the way of fear. The way of fear. There's no more common commandment in the Bible or from Jesus himself than this. Do not be afraid. And so this is what I'm asking you actually is, what's going on in your life where you think, you know what, I would like to make a difference. I would like to engage this person. I would like to help. I'd like to take a trip. I'd like to take a mission trip, but I'm not going to. And why am I not? Because I'm afraid. Because I don't know how it's all going to work out. Because I don't know how I'd come up with the money. Because I don't know. And this is what I'm telling you tonight. Love does means taking a risk for true success. Before you have it all figured out, you go for it. The nature of people who live on this side, in this ditch, is that they have trouble trusting. Trouble trusting. And I just want to ask you tonight, is it possible that I'm describing you? That you have trouble trusting? You actually attached failure to regret, and so you decide not to risk it all? Please, 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 don't construct your life that way. On the other side of the ditch, the regret is that maybe you've had success, but it's not true success. Maybe you actually had a picture in your mind of what you wanted to accomplish in life, and you're accomplishing it. But you're actually just kind of picturing right now, but was I focused on the right things? Was my definition of success an accurate definition of success? You see, one of the things that happens, this potentially happens to all of us, is this isn't the way of fear. This is just going in the way of the world. In the way of the world. The world suggests life should be somehow. Now, let me give you two images of that. Hugh Hefner died last night. And I got to tell you, I can't believe the coverage I've seen today that is lifting him up as an icon. This is a man. Listen, I don't normally talk about people negatively the day after they've died. But this is a man who objectified women, brought into our culture into the freedom of pornography, suggested that long-term, healthy, two-person relationships weren't really the way to live your life. And trust me, it took root. It took root. That is a way, if you're doing anything in your life that is bringing about evil, you have to step away from that. But most of you, it's not actually that you've constructed your life for evil. You just constructed your life the same way everyone around you is constructing it. It was just the way the world does it. And I'm suggesting to you that there's nothing wrong with a big house and a nice car and beautiful body. I don't care. It just isn't enough. That cannot be how you get to the end of your life and think, I made it. The trouble with people on this side is obeying. Because obeying to become a disciple of Jesus is deny yourself and take up your cross and aim for a success that is true but doesn't usually come with accolades, that is difference-making but doesn't come with cash in your pocket, and can lead you to places that are awkward and difficult but meaningful. I want to very quickly read to you a few verses out of a much longer passage in the New Testament. When Jesus was in the upper room with his disciples, it's recorded in the Gospel of John from chapter 13 all the way through John chapter 16. If you want to figure out how love does and what it looks like to take a risk for true success, you should read the whole thing this week. But just follow a few things with me. Jesus says, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should wash one another's feet." Can you imagine how awkward that was for Jesus? If I told you today, hey, here's the application of the message. I want you to have a party with all your neighbors, bring them over to your house, and then get out a bowl of water, and then wash their feet, right? You would say, Greg, that would be uncomfortable. That would be awkward. And I'm telling you, it was no less awkward for Jesus than it would be for you. But it was powerful. It was an expression of love. It was telling his followers that he would serve them, not just them serve him. He says, as I've loved you, so you must love one another. Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you? I'll lay down my life for you. This is the moment when Jesus says, no, you won't. Before the rooster crows, 3 times you'll reject me. You'll say you didn't even know me. But he's at least out there. He's take the risk. Jesus says, don't let your hearts be troubled. Believe, trust. Trust in God. Trust also in me. Don't you dare, hey, disciples of mine, don't you dare construct your life in such a way where you're playing it safe. That is not my way. He says, if you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. You trust me. You go not only in my way, but with my power and with my strength. You do that, you'll see fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Get this. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. You make a lot of friends constructing your life in the same way the rest of the world does. It would love you. It does that. As it is, though, you don't belong to the world, but I've chosen you out of the world. He says, but very truly I tell you, it's for your good that I'm going away. You want to talk about a scary risk moment? All the disciples, when Jesus was with them, they felt strong. And now Jesus says, I'm leaving. He says, you can do it. Take the risk. Be bold. He says, I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world, you'll have trouble. But take heart. Take courage. I've overcome the world. I don't know if anything's hit you over the last 30 minutes that made you think, you know what, maybe I've constructed my life entirely the wrong way. But you could just step back and ask yourself a couple questions to say, if I adjusted into the way of Jesus, if I got out of the ditch and onto the road, what's the worst that could happen? What's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is that you would follow Jesus, you would trust him, you'd experience some failure along the way, and you'd get to the end of your life and you'd say, I wish there were more fruit, Jesus, but I was faithful. What's the best that could happen? The best that could happen is that day by day and year over year, your path would be littered with people who you loved because you didn't do other things. And you changed the world. You changed their worlds. And so I'm going to pray for us right now. And this is actually a prayer. I'm going to speak this prayer out loud, but I want this to be your prayer this week. Instead of 3 specific people to go do something or be with someone, I want this to be your prayer this week. And then whenever you notice it, you just trust God. Here's the prayer. God, I will not shrink back when I sense you leading me to love. Can I pray that with us together right now? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, don't let us shrink back when you're leading us to love. God, we know that your word tells us that the righteous will live by faith. And if we shrink back, that's not your way. You're not pleased with that. So in our moments of fear, help us to trust. And in the moments where we want to just do our own thing, help us to obey. In the name of Jesus Christ.